Your final breath is a chemical ignition sequence. For your entire life, you've probably been told that your final breath is an ending, a gentle fade to black, a silent closing of the book. But what if that's not the whole story? What if your last moment isn't an end, but something more like a biological launch sequence? A trickle of new data suggests that some dying brains are engulfed in a chemical flood, a final massive burst of energy. Research is starting to uncover a cascade of neurophysiological processes that can unfold in those final minutes. The question is it just a final, chaotic dream, or is consciousness rebooting into a new reality? Section 1. The end of the line. Or is it? For centuries, dying has been shrouded in mystery, lit only by the strange stories of those who have journeyed to the brink and returned. These near-death experiences, or NDEs, have some common themes, but they're also shaped by culture. Many people in Western cultures describe a feeling of peace, floating outside their own body, traveling through a tunnel toward a light, and a panoramic life review. But these features aren't universal. Studies show significant variations in how NDEs are experienced and interpreted across different belief systems. For example, the tunnel of light is less common in non-Western accounts, which might feature different imagery altogether. For a long time, these accounts were dismissed as fantasy, hallucinations from a traumatized mind. But what if they aren't just hallucinations? What if they're subjective reports of a real, measurable biological event? Science is now starting to suggest the dying process is anything but a quiet shutdown. A few striking case studies on dying patients have recorded a surprising surge of organized electrical activity just before and after the heart stops. Based on these limited but provocative findings, some researchers now hypothesize that the brain can be hyperactivated for a brief period. This forces us to ask a profound question. What is the brain actually doing in its final moments? Section 2. The Cascade. What science is starting to see. To understand this, we have to look at what happens when the body's life support systems fail. When the heart stops, blood flow ceases. The brain, our most energy-hungry organ, is immediately starved of oxygen and glucose. It was once thought that brain activity simply flickers out within seconds. But more detailed recordings have revealed a much more dramatic process in some cases. As brain cells are deprived of oxygen, they begin to lose their electrical balance. While it's plausible that the brain's stress chemistry, like adrenaline and pain-suppressing endorphins, floods the system, what we have more direct evidence for is something truly extraordinary. Instead of just going silent, the brain can unleash a massive wave of electrochemical energy known as terminal spreading depolarization. Imagine a city during a blackout. Instead of every light going out at once, a wave of power surges through the grid, causing a final, brilliant flash before darkness. Researchers have called this a brain tsunami. This wave marks the beginning of toxic changes that can lead to irreversible damage. But it's also a moment of immense, coordinated activity. And right in the middle of this collapse, a few studies have found a surge in highly organized gamma waves, the same brain waves associated with higher consciousness, memory recall, and deep meditation. In a couple of dying patients, these gamma bursts have been measured at levels that appear to be much higher than those in a normal, healthy, waking brain. The data is extremely limited, and we have to be cautious, but it suggests the brain, in the very act of dying, might for a few moments be doing something it doesn't normally do when it's fully alive. Section 3. The eternity in a moment. This potential neurochemical firestorm might hold the key to one of the most baffling features of near-death experiences, the sense that time itself dissolves. Survivors often report that seconds stretched into what felt like minutes, or even a lifetime. They sometimes experience a life review, a rapid but incredibly detailed playback of their memories. How is that possible? Well, your perception of time isn't constant. It's a story your brain tells itself, woven from attention and memory. Under extreme stress and altered neurochemistry, that internal clock can break. As the brain is flooded with chaotic signals, the density of subjective events per second could skyrocket. The speculative link here is the surge in gamma waves, which are thought to help bind different parts of the brain together to form conscious memories. One hypothesis is that the brain, in a final attempt to make sense of the chaos, might generate a hyper-fast stream of memories and internal images. It could be an active memory recall system, explaining why some NDE survivors report seeing loved ones or reliving past events. But there's another layer. It's also possible this feeling of a life review is a retrospective reconstruction. If and when the brain recovers, it might take the fragmented, chaotic data from the crisis and package it into a coherent story. So the story of a lifetime isn't necessarily what you experience during the event, but how your brain tells the story after the event. It's a final, epic act of self-narration. Section 4, the ghost in the machine, the DMT question. But what could be the fuel for such an internal vision? This is where the story moves to a more controversial frontier of neuroscience. For years, there's been speculation about a specific molecule, N,N-dimethyltryptamine, or DMT. It's a powerful psychedelic found in many plants and animals, and it's produced in the human body. When taken as a drug, it produces experiences that can be uncannily similar to NDEs, immersive visual worlds, encounters with strange entities, and a sense of timelessness. This has led to a tantalizing hypothesis. What if the dying brain releases its own supply of DMT, triggering one final, profound psychedelic journey? Rodent studies have confirmed DMT is present in the mammalian brain. But, and this is a critical distinction, there is currently no direct clinical evidence that human brains produce a massive DMT surge at the moment of death. In fact, some argue that the brain's serotonin system, which is heavily affected by psychedelics and the stress of dying, could be a more likely driver for these states, without needing a specific DMT flood. Section 5, the final frontier, consciousness itself. This all leads to an evolutionary puzzle. Why would the brain have a complex, coordinated exit program at all? It seems counterintuitive. One plausible explanation is that it's not a program for dying, but a final, desperate activation of programs for living. Dissociation, pain suppression, hyperarousal, these are all survival circuits. From this perspective, the NDE isn't a planned departure. It's the spectacular misfiring of survival mechanisms as the whole system collapses. Some researchers even hypothesize that these experiences could be an adaptive function, helping the brain cope with a lethal threat. But this is where science meets its edge. Some theorists, like Sir Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff, have proposed the ORC-OR theory, suggesting that consciousness isn't just about neurons firing, but arises from quantum processes inside the microtubules of those neurons. This theory is highly speculative and not accepted by most neuroscientists, who point to the lack of evidence and the brain's warm, wet environment being hostile to delicate quantum states. Still, it opens a philosophical door. If consciousness were, for the sake of argument, somehow separate from the brain, then the brain might be more of a receiver or filter for it. In this view, the chemical ignition sequence of death isn't the brain creating a final dream. It's the receiver malfunctioning, perhaps briefly tuning into a signal that's always there. This lines up with arguments from a minority of researchers who believe NDEs are evidence that consciousness might survive bodily death, though major studies have not found verifiable proof of this. So we're left with two powerful, competing interpretations. The first is neurobiological. The dying brain, through a complex cascade of oxygen deprivation and electrical surges, generates a final, profound hallucination, a movie of your own life, for an audience of one. The second is more metaphysical. The brain's shutdown reveals something fundamental about consciousness itself, suggesting it may not be confined to the fragile tissue in our skulls. Conclusion: the unanswered question. We began with a simple question: what happens when we die? The journey has taken us from a fading heartbeat to cascading brain tsunamis, from the illusion of time to the chemistry of psychedelics, and finally, to the very edge of what we understand about consciousness. Science is replacing the idea of a simple fade to black with something far more active and extraordinary. The evidence, though limited, suggests the final moments of life are not an empty void, but can be a period of intense brain activity. But the ultimate question remains: is this chemical ignition sequence the brain's final, spectacular masterpiece? A self-generated dream to ease its own passing? Or is it the countdown for a launch into a reality we can't yet measure? Is the brain showing you one last movie, or is it showing you the door? What do you think is happening in those final moments? Let me know your thoughts. And if you want to keep exploring the biggest questions of existence, make sure to subscribe.